What's up, D-Gens? I'm back. Actually had a winning week last week. I mean, I don't know too many people that are like actively in hell, but I'm pretty sure it was good for them, because it froze over and whatnot. Like, it's a good, change of weather. So that's cool. But other than that, well, really, what else is there to say, right? Finally had a winning week. Get back on the horse that's knocked me off for about 8 weeks in a row. But it's all good. Finally, just trying to hope we keep this going. And actually, for this week, we are going to do another play where it is just a one-play week. Not so much because of like a cold streak or trying to balance anything. This is really because this is I only saw really one game that like absolutely stood out to me, and usually I'm looking for plays that just kind of scream like, "Hey, look at this! This is definitely wrong." And that's pretty much the only one that I saw this week. That being said, if you are following the channel, if you have a subscription or whatever, you probably saw the community post. I finally got a community page, which I don't know why the hell they gave me that, but it works. So the play that was announced earlier this week, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday, is the Chargers as Falcons Chargers over 49. So when this line first came out, it was at 49. I believe as of right now, it's been bet up to 50. So I apologize if you are kind of late to this here. I do still think that there's value at 50. My hard stop is at 51. So you should have a little bit of time here to get a play in there. But I do think you're going to see the number continue to go up as we get closer and closer to actual kickoff. Now, that being said, I've had a couple people just like in personal life ask me like, what the hell, like why are we taking over on this game? Especially with a lot of people who aren't really like Chargers fans or believers. And my whole thing is that the Chargers cannot stop the run. The biggest concern, let's go over that part first, right? The negatives on why this maybe won't hit. And that's going to be because of just straight injuries. Keenan Allen is probably not going to play this week, at least from what I'm hearing. I know he does have a chance to play, but he's had a hamstring issue that's just like lingering. And apparently, last week during the bye week, I don't know what the hell he was doing, but somehow he made his hamstring worse. I don't know what you do to make that happen. I mean, maybe, obviously he's getting older, but yeah, not looking good. It may be one of these things where he's out for the season. Austin Eckler has his own podcast, and he had actually mentioned something that I thought was pretty insightful. He was, at least for fantasy, he was saying to go pick up Joshua Palmer, and his thing was not so much that Mike Williams is also out, but that Joshua Palmer, as far as like the roles on the team, is really more suited to be the backup for Mike Williams. He's the backup that's like a deep threat guy, big body guy, kind of go up and make those contested catches kind of guy. Whereas Keenan Allen is more of like a excellent route runner, maybe underneath kind of stuff, possession receiver, that kind of stuff. And that's really not Joshua Palmer's role. So when Keenan Allen has been out and they've had Palmer back there trying to play that role, it was just not really a good fit. Now that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are out, we may see a little bit of a difference. Hopefully, they'll keep Josh Palmer in that Mike Williams role. Because, I mean, if Austin Eckler, as a player, knows this kind of thing, you would think Brandon Staley would also know his personnel and put Palmer in that better position. But this is just a long-winded way of saying I think that the Chargers are still going to be able to move the ball. They have depth behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Yeah, maybe, Palmer is not as good as Mike Williams because he's not the starter, right? But the gap in just like ability at this level of play is so slim. I mean, even if you look at like earlier in the season, we were talking about like Madden ratings and algorithms and stuff like that. Usually an injury to a receiver, unless it's a team that just has absolutely no talent behind their number one guy, the change in your like rating is very, very minimal. And even at that, it's a lot of just how are you going to play, right? Like what scheme do you fit into? So I think the Chargers are going to be fine. But let's look at the Falcons side of the ball. They also have some injuries. Now, their injuries are actually on the defensive side of the ball. They have a safety that's questionable, a corner that's questionable, one corner that's already, I believe he's on IR, if not out for the year. They're missing a defensive tackle. So they have all sorts of injuries on that defense, and it explains a lot of why they've been putting up or letting up as many points as they have this season, at least the last couple weeks. But that's really the injury standpoint on that. So the Chargers' injury issues would be my biggest concern here as to why maybe this over doesn't come through. If that offense just seems slower, if maybe they're trying to use the ground game more because they don't trust these receivers as much. Even if they are able to move the ball, obviously it takes a lot longer if you're just running the ball the entire time and you're eating up more clock because you're not stopping the clock with incompletions and stuff like that. So those things, like I said, would be my concern. Now, again, those concerns for me are kind of alleviated by the fact that the Falcons don't have their starting defense, and even when they did, it wasn't all that great. So I think the Chargers are going to find their success here. Now, as to why we think this is going to come through, if you're looking at the screen and you're looking at the games the Chargers have played, and I'm just going to go over the last 4 weeks because anything past that, we could look at it. But things have changed, injuries have happened, schematics have changed, all that kind of stuff. So I just like to look at the last 4 weeks when we're talking about this stuff. Of the last 4 weeks, one game has not gone over the 49-point total, and that was the Broncos-Chargers game. One, that's a divisional game, and it was their first meeting, which, as we've discussed, usually the first meeting between two divisional opponents is the lower scoring of the two. So when these guys match up again, it should be a higher scoring game. But secondly, the Broncos' offense is just not good in general, regardless of who's back there. And this was when Russell Wilson was still, when he was healthy or supposedly healthy. Didn't matter if you've seen any sort of Broncos game at all, which I'm sure at this point you have. You know that their offense just doesn't really move the ball very well. And for them to only put up 16 points against the Chargers defense, it's really allowing almost anything. It is more indicative of the Broncos, if you ask me. And the Chargers, I think, are the kind of team that they're going to be as aggressive as you make them. So if you're not scoring points, they're not going to try to push the issue. That being said, the other three games here, Seahawks-Chargers, it was 60, Browns-Chargers, 58. Even the damn Texans-Chargers also hit 58. The main threat with all three of these teams is their run game. And the Chargers have not and cannot stop the run at all. Now, they are coming off a bye week this week, and so maybe they kind of adjust their defense a little bit to cater more towards stopping the run. But this has been their Achilles heel since last year, and I don't think 1 week is going to make a whole lot of difference. Let's just go through the numbers real quick. So with the Seahawks, Ken Walker put up 23 runs, 167 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, like I said, with the running game, obviously that does slow the game down or it really speeds up the clock. So typically we see less scoring in that game. But because the Chargers can turn around and score when they need to, we end up with a 60-point total in that one. Secondly, just another a weakness that I've seen with the Chargers is typically the second receiving threat on whatever team they're playing against gets open. For whatever reason, the Chargers kind of neglect the second guy on just about every team. So if you remember that game, that's the game DK Metcalf hurt his knee. So he had a couple receptions, but then he got hurt. Tyler Lockett was really the number one guy. Marquise Goodwin came in off the bench and really the first time in forever. And he had 4 receptions for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, again, maybe the Chargers really, really focus on taking away your number one guy. Derwin James is pretty good at that. But after that, if you can run the ball, you can be effective. And if you have any sort of secondary option, you should be pretty effective. Going back to the Browns-Chargers, again, just to show the Chargers cannot stop the run, Nick Chubb was 17 attempts for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. David Njoku is really their number 2 guy. Now, Amari Cooper had 7 receptions and I believe 100 yards or somewhere around there. Don't have it right here in front of me. It's a pretty good game for Amari Cooper, but David Njoku as their number 2 guy puts up 88 yards for a tight end spot, that's pretty damn good. And obviously this game, they just kept moving the ball every which way. The Chargers couldn't do anything to stop anything, and the Browns just kind of had their way with whatever they wanted. So, again, high-scoring game, get to 58, back-and-forth game. The Browns could have won this game. This is the one where they missed the last-second field goal, so this really could have been a 61-point game. And the Chargers kind of botched the ending there where they gave themselves a chance to lose it. Anyways, a lot of high scoring here, and then we go back to the Chargers-Texans. With the Texans, if you watch the Eagles-Texans on Thursday night, the Texans also play kind of a slower pace of game. They do pass, obviously, but a lot of it is very short stuff. They like to use their tight ends. They're not really like a deep threat kind of team. In this game, Chargers-Texans, Dameon Pierce, obviously their main guy. He had 14 attempts for 131 yards and 1 touchdown. So, I mean, if you're seeing this, kind of the trend with the running backs here, Nick Chubb and Dameon Pierce didn't get like an ungodly amount of attempts. They got 14 and 17 attempts, and they put up 130-plus yards and at least 1 touchdown each. Chargers cannot stop the run, and the Browns the Browns offensive line is good. The Texans offensive line is average, I guess, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I don't think it's anything that you need to be scared of. And still, Dameon Pierce was able to do what he does. Going back to the secondary, receiving option threat on this one. So back then, Brandon Cooks was playing, obviously. So he was our number 1 guy. Nico Collins was our number 2 guy, and he had 3 catches for 82 yards. So again, a pretty high total for a secondary option. And I'm going over all these games because the Falcons play a very similar style of game to really all 4 of these teams, in that they want to run the ball. They have, a receiving threat, but like in Drake London, but maybe he's not always utilized as much as we would like him to be as gambling or fantasy fans or whatever. But just based off what the Chargers have been able to do, like I said, maybe they adjust their defense a little bit to kind of scheme some of these things out. But I at the end of the day, you're pretty limited when someone's trying to run against you. There's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, unless you're going to put 8 in the box every single time. And even that, it's like, well, with Mariota, are you really going to risk the bootlegs coming out? It's just not a whole lot the Chargers can do, in my opinion, to change their defense so much in 1 week that these numbers just absolutely fall off a cliff. So I do expect the Falcons to have a lot of success. I think they are another team like the Browns that's going to have that kind of two-headed running back attack, where you have Algier have a really good game. Maybe he also has like a 15 attempt for a 100-yard kind of game. And then you also have Huntley come out for another, 10 attempts, and hopefully maybe he also has another 100 yards, something like that, or 80 yards or whatever. But on top of that, then you also have Kyle Pitts, which I think he's kind of the secondary option as far as the pass game is concerned, and the Falcons don't throw that much in general. But if and when they do, I think Drake London is their number 1 guy, Kyle Pitts is their number 2 guy, and Kyle Pitts should have a really good showing this game. I expect him to have something like David Njoku had just a few weeks ago. He's probably looking at like the 5 to 8 catch range, 80, 90, 100 yards, maybe a touchdown. But also I think you probably have, out of the 2 running backs, you probably have 2 or 3 touchdowns scored. You have Mariota that's probably going to score. So I think on the Falcons side of the ball, we're probably looking at about 4 touchdowns here. Whether, who you want to give those to is completely up to you, but I think you're probably looking at about a 4-touchdown game here on one side of the ball. So that's about 28 points, maybe 31-ish if you get a field goal in there somewhere, but I think you're going to have a higher scoring game on that side. Now to flip that around and look at the Falcons side of the ball, it's kind of a similar path here. The last 4 games that we're going to look at, they are a little bit different from the Chargers in the fact that the Chargers can kind of throw a little bit more than like the Panthers or the 49ers could back then. But in this particular game, again, the Chargers are going to be without their 2 starting receivers. So we're going to look a little bit more at the running game and like the short passing game. And The short passing game is really what I'm concerned with, because I think that's where the Chargers are going to try to, kind of make their bread, as you want to say. You have Austin Eckler, who's been just tremendous at catching the ball out of the backfield. On top of that, you also have Gerald Everett, who he can get stats like nobody else. This dude can put up a huge game. And then, like I said earlier, you're going to have these secondary backup receivers who are going to come in. Maybe they have a couple of big threats or big receptions down the field. But I do expect to see a lot of slants, a lot of just kind of drag routes, stuff like that. Just stuff to kind of keep the chains moving. And also a strong focus on Austin Eckler here. Not just running the ball, but catching the ball. And kind of keeping the Falcons' defense off balance a little bit. Now, just look at the last couple of running backs they played. Surprisingly enough, the 49ers are the one team that didn't have a lot of success against the Falcons. Obviously, they only put up 14 points. But let's look at the totals as well from the Falcons side of the ball. Falcons-Panthers ends up going to 71. Bengals-Falcons ends up going to 52. Falcons, 49ers, even in a bad showing by the 49ers, end up with a 42-point total. And then the Falcons, Buccaneers ends up at 36, which is the lowest of the four. But you have the Buccaneers, who, again, slow-paced kind of team in general. And if you remember watching this game, the first half was just almost unbearable. It was just very, very physical, which is cool, but it is really, really slow. Both teams basically doing everything they could to not throw the ball. I think it was like 14-0 at the start of the fourth quarter or something like that. Maybe it was even 21-0 before the Falcons even scored anything. The Falcons waited till the absolute last minute to start scoring. So just a really, really defensive game. Again, that's another game where we have a divisional opponent. So, again, we would expect it to be a lower scoring game for the first go-around with these guys. But that's really the only one that just kind of stands out here as being like a low-scoring game. And, again, the Buccaneers and the 49ers have a different play style than the Chargers do. But let's look at the running back outputs, right? So we have the Panthers with Donta Foreman. He is 26 for 118 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Bengals had Joe Mixon go for 17, 58, and 1 touchdown. Now, his receiving totals are a little, I guess, kind of shady here. He had 3 catches for 33 yards, which doesn't seem like a whole lot. But if you go back and watch that game, it's a lot of little underneath stuff where Joe Mixon, is just kind of coming out the backfield, and Joe Burrow's hitting him because he's getting pressure in his face or whatever. And Joe Mixon really makes the most out of these little dump-offs, and I think he only does it 3 times. I think you're going to see Austin Eckler do that a whole hell of a lot. Like, that is the Chargers' go-to play, basically. The 49ers really didn't have anybody do anything, but in the Buccaneers game, he did have Leonard Fournette go off 14 attempts for 56 yards and a touchdown, and then he also added 10 receptions for 83 yards and another touchdown, which is, again, similar to what you're going to see Austin Eckler do in the amount of receptions, I think. But Leonard Fournette is not as quick, not as shifty, and really not as great of a pass catcher or route runner as Austin Eckler. So I think Austin Eckler is just going to do some work in this game. If he can get through everything healthy and he can be fine, he had some abdomen issue, I think he's going to just go to work in this game. So with that being said, the Chargers should also have their way with this Falcons team. If they can get Austin Eckler rolling, have Joshua Palmer kind of as just a downfield threat, or at least running some slant routes and moving the ball, I don't think the Falcons can stop this. I think that they're going to have a very similar game to the one that they had last week against the Panthers, where it's just a back-and-forth scoring kind of game. And both of these two teams together just happen to have an offense that matches up very, very well against the defense of the other team. For all of these reasons, I'm taking the over 49. It's a full unit play for me. That's pretty much going to be my only play for the week. Maybe something else pops up live or whatever. I'll look into that. But for right now, just the over on the Chargers-Falcons game at 49. It's at 50. Like I said, I think you do have value all the way up to 51. I'm not touching this thing once it gets over 51. But that's where it's at, guys. So thank you for taking the time to watch this. I know it was a pretty lengthy breakdown for one particular game. But if you want to check other stuff like EDSR and DVOA and all that kind of stuff that we usually talk about, it's out there. It all pretty much supports exactly what I'm telling you here. But again, I've looked at those numbers all year long, and this year in particular, for whatever reason, has just not been a good year to handicap strictly off of the stats. This is one of those years where you really got to give the eye test to more teams, because the stats, some teams are really, really just pitiful when it comes to defense. And even through 8 weeks, a lot of these stats seem more misleading than helpful. So take that into account, especially if you're looking up a lot of that stuff and you're handicapping off of it. You saw me, if you watch this channel, go for like 6 weeks of just straight losing, going based off of these stats and algorithms. And not to say that I'm the best at doing that, but it does just kind of prove that there are some times when the numbers are just going to not lead you in the right direction, and you got to go more off of feel and eye test. So again, let's make this another winning week. Good luck to everybody out there. I hope you guys follow me. Y'all have a great day.